Once again, welcome to Strategies for Living with author and international speaker Doug Sparks. In this episode, Doug discusses how to accomplish your goals now that you have defined them. And now, here's Doug.
Hello, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. Continuing on, we're talking about setting goals. I just have a couple other comments to make before we move on. First thing is, you absolutely have to write your goal down. This is significant and important that you do that. So write it out, and then don't stick it away somewhere. Put it somewhere that you will see it regularly. You don't have to be every day necessarily, but you want that constant reminder until it becomes really ingrained into your being as part of who you are, and you know deep inside, you know what your life goal is looking at. You know what you want to be when you're finishing up your life. You know what you want to not necessarily look like, but what you want to be like, and that kind of defines who you are. And so write it down, look at it often, and what you'll find too is this is really interesting. Because I hear a lot of people, particularly young people, but not just necessarily young people, but a lot of people say, I'm looking for meaning in my life, and I can't seem to find it. I'm trying to pursue this and pursue that, and I just don't seem to have any meaning. Well, here's an interesting side benefit, I think, of goal setting. Once you set a goal, then that automatically creates a sense of meaning into what you're doing. So meaning isn't something out there that you're looking for. If you want to have meaning in your life, do meaningful things. Well, what's a meaningful thing? Hey, how about doing things that move you towards your goal? That's meaningful, right? If your goal is important to you, then what is meaningful is what you are doing that moves you closer to your goal. So not only do you get the two kicks from dopamine and serotonin, but now you get an added value of meaning in your life and that's what substantiates us, right? Because the worst thing we can have, other than some terrible disease, I guess, but one of the worst things you can have is to be, I guess the opposite of meaningless would be hopeless. When there's no hope, there's usually no meaning, and that's when the bottom drops out. And when people are hopeless, that's pretty good indication that they're circling the bottom of the drain down there. And so one of the things that happens then, as I said, when you have a goal, you get a sense of meaning in your life. And meaning isn't something that's out there that you go looking for. Meaning is doing meaningful things. That is what instills meaning in your life. And so that's a really important concept to embrace, and also a good reason why you want to establish goals. Now, what we talked about establishing life goals, that's kind of like, depending on how old you are, that's several decades or a lot of decades down the road. But what about like tomorrow or the next day? So in life, you are going to set multiple goals. There will be a goal for your, say, occupation. There will be a goal that you have in mind for if you're not married, if you're looking for a spouse. There's going to be a certain goal you have. There's going to be a certain goal for friendships, for family, on and on and on. So you're going to have multiple goals. So when you do this, obviously, having the goal is one thing, and it's important, and you need to have specific goals. But if you only have a goal and you don't have a plan, in other words, how are you going to get to that goal, then your goals are utterly meaningless. They don't have any value really in your life. So setting the goal is step one. Step two now is coming up with what's called a strategic plan. How are you going to accomplish your goal? I'll give you an example. Probably 10 years ago, I had a friend of mine. He was a professor at the university, and he was a great outdoorsman. And he was hiking the Colorado Trail in Colorado, and I mentioned that earlier. It's a trail that's about 486 miles long, it's basically across the state of Colorado, particularly through the mountains. And so he was hiking that, and he kept telling me about it. And at that time, I was more into mountain running, so I did like the Pikes Peak Ascent, which is just outside of here, Colorado Springs. I did a lot of races and a lot of mountain running, and I loved it. So I thought, hiking, it's not that exciting, just kind of plodding along with a backpack and whatever. Well, then it came a time when, how can I put? I had one too many knee surgeries. I'll put it that way. And my orthopedic surgeon said, "Well, your running days are over." Now, I had that before when I had a previous knee surgery, and we were living in Switzerland at the time. And the surgeon then, when he got done fixing my knee up, he said, "Well, your running days are over." And I loved running. Since I was a little kid, I just love it for whatever reason. Perverted, I know, but I just love it. And this surgeon in Switzerland said, "Your running days are over, Doug. Sorry." And I'm going, "Yeah, whatever." And so I remember the first day once I got out of the hospital, I limped across the street, and I couldn't even run. I could maybe run 10 feet, and it hurt like crazy. And I said, "No, that wasn't so bad." So I thought, the next day I tried it again. It didn't hurt quite. So I started running. And then after that, I for the next 30 years, I ran pretty hard. I ran marathons and mountain races and on and on and on. But this time, this orthopedic surgeon said, "Well, you could run, but the more you run, the sooner you get arthritis. So I suggest you don't run." And I'm going, "Okay, whatever." So then when I wasn't running like 3 hours a day or something, something crazy, I was surprised. I had all this extra time on my hands, and I thought, "Oh, this is it." And then I thought, well, maybe that hiking thing wouldn't be such a bad thing. I can continue to run a little bit, and that'll keep me in shape. And then I could do some long distance hiking. But for me, the Colorado Trail wasn't that appealing because a lot of people do it, and it's pretty straightforward. It's like with hiking, it's like getting on an interstate because the trail is well maintained. They've got these little markers every so often that tell you this is the Colorado Trail, and it was a little too domestic for me. But there was another trail in Colorado called the Continental Divide Trail, and I'd mentioned it in the earlier episodes. And the Continental Divide Trail was like the granddaddy of all the trails. I mean, this thing was tough. And it was not well traveled back when I first started doing it. Now it's become more popular, more and more people are doing it. But back when I first started doing it, it was still pretty much a novelty. And there's a number of reasons why. One is it's pretty tough going because you're hiking basically along the Continental Divide, and most people don't know what the Continental Divide is, but in theory, in the Rocky Mountains, if a raindrop hits on the top of the Continental Divide and it splits in half and one goes east and one goes west, shall we say, the water from that, if it goes east, will end up in the Atlantic Ocean via the Caribbean, and if it goes west, it's going to end up in the Pacific Ocean. So it's really a watershed term of which way the water is going to flow. But obviously, it's the high point on those places. And so the Continental Divide Trail, while it doesn't stay exactly on the Continental Divide, it parallels it pretty close. And so your high elevation, I remember there's one ridge that runs for about 55 miles. And I think in 55 miles, you were at 12,000 feet or higher, except for one little place where it drops down to like 10.5 and then right back up to 12 again. And so there's a lot of, it was normally pulling 6,000 to 8,000 feet vertical a day was pretty normal. That was an average day. And the fun part for me is there were a lot of days when you didn't see anybody. There was one day I saw twice as many bears as I saw people. So anyway, that was my challenge. I loved doing it, but it's 800 miles from the New Mexico border with Colorado all the way up to Wyoming. And so my goal was to hike the Colorado Trail. Wow, that's a great goal. But then how are you going to do it? Well, then the work started, because then I had to come up with a strategic plan. First of all, I couldn't hike it as a through hike. In other words, I couldn't start and then hike for the next 3 months to accomplish it. I just didn't have the time to do it. You had a job and all kinds of stuff. So I couldn't do that. But what I could do is I could hike it section at a time. I could do between, say, 75 and 125 miles at a go. And so I began to think, okay, what are the segments I can break this up into and hike it segment at a time every summer? Well, then you have to think, okay, that's what you're going to, but then how are you going to do it? What are you going to carry? And because everything you have is in a backpack, so everything that you want to take, you got to carry it. And obviously, when I first started out, my pack was way too heavy. And you learn over the years how to cut it down. Like I cut the handle off of my toothbrush. It saved me 3 ounces. When I put my food in my bag, I gave myself 23 ounces of food a day, and I would weigh it 23 ounces, no more. That's all the food you get. And so eventually and still at that, my pack was between 25 and 30 pounds when I started out. And then, of course, as you ate the food and stuff, it came down a little bit. But then I need to figure out, well, what kind of maps are there? Because the Colorado Trail, as I mentioned, is like an interstate. The Continental Divide Trail it's only a trail in name only. It's more a concept and an idea rather than an actual trail. The idea is to get from New Mexico to Wyoming, somewhere in this general vicinity. And sometimes there was no trail, so you just had to kind of make it up. And so how are you going to orient yourself? And so in the early days, this is before the GPSs and that sort of stuff came out. And so I had my paper map. I didn't carry a compass because I was born and raised in Colorado. I know Colorado pretty well, and I knew that generally I wanted to be going north. And so I figured I could figure that out, which I was able to do, fortunately. But I had these little maps that had the trail on them, and you had to figure out exactly where you were on the map, and you had to take you had to really know what your route was, what you're hoping to get to, and how. And I remember one time I was on a fairly decent trail, and I came around this corner, and there was a it looked like more like a game trail or something that went off this way, and the good trail went straight ahead. And I'm thinking, now that can't be the Continental Divide Trail, the little one. I'll keep on. And pretty soon I'm thinking, you know what? I'm not going in the right direction. I'm losing elevation, and I'm going more southeast than I should. I need to be going north here. And so I backtrack, and sure enough, I hiked up this little trail that looked like a game trail, and I get up in there, and I see a little marker there. They're called comfort markers. And there was a little marker that somebody had scratched on their tree, said CDT, Continental Divide Trail. Well, the trail was that little one. It wasn't the big one. So you had to be on your toes. You'd end up in another state. So all these things had to be planned down into detail. How much food, what your equipment looks like, carrying a tent and a sleeping bag, and I was doing it solo. So I had to take that into account. And so, you had to be prepared for every eventuality, because if something happened, there was nobody that was going to be there to help you out. So with a strategic plan, and I think it was about 8 years later, I finally accomplished hiking the Continental Divide Trail of Colorado. And but it was serious planning. I would start the planning every winter in about January, February, and then I would do my hike in August. And it would take me that much time, most of the time, to plan all the details. And what I found was this: the more detailed I was at planning, the less unnecessary suffering I had. Okay, because if I didn't plan well, somewhere along the line, you're going to suffer for it. Now, when it comes to setting goals, there's a couple of things you want to do. One, you want to make it specific, so it doesn't just say, like, especially when you're talking about these sub goals. Your life goal could be pretty general. Okay, you want to be a really good person. Well, how do you measure that? Well, that's going to be an internal thing that only you will be able to do ultimately at the end of the day. When it comes to the sub goals of, say, education or family or whatever happens to be, your goals need to be pretty specific. And if you really want to break them down, not only are they specific, then it usually has a time factor to it and a budget and all this kind of. But that's getting a little too complicated for our purposes. Basically, all I want to say is this: when it comes to goal setting, make sure it's attainable, that it's reachable. You want to have goals that are big enough to make you kind of work for it, but not so grandiose that they're way beyond your wildest dreams, okay? So the closer you can make those goals into the 3 to 5 year goals, then the more possibility that you're going to have to attaining them, to achieving the goal. Now, the other thing you need to keep in mind while you're making these goals is, remember that the hand that you're dealt is the hand you're going to have to play. So if you are not very good in mathematics and you really don't like science very much, having a goal of being a theoretical physicist is probably not going to work out very well for you, okay? If there's things, and this is where we go back to your temperaments. Always keep in mind, temperamentally, 1, what are you good at? And 2, what do you like? Now, that has meaning and value, in the sense that it moves you towards your goal. Now, unless you want to be a professional player of games, laying on your couch in the basement, playing games for 10 hours a day is probably not a good goal. Unless that's your main goal, that's what you want to do as a career. For the most part, the activity that takes to make the goal realistic and completable will reside within, one, your natural proclivities, those temperamental things that you like to do and you're good at, and then also it depends on how you orient yourself and align yourself with a goal that's achievable. And so when you start moving towards it, then it kind of comes into focus. And here's the other thing. Your goal will not be easily achieved. You will have failure. You will have setbacks. There will be challenges. There are the unexpected things that come along that just kind of wipe everything out. And then you got to start again. So you can't give up when the going gets tough. We all heard this saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Well, that's a pretty good truism, because when you set goals and you try to accomplish them, it almost never works out the way you plan it. But as long as you're moving towards it and you're putting your effort into it, you will have hopefully the fortitude to overcome the challenges that also come with setting goals. So it's not just an easy thing where you just set it up and it's automatically going to happen. Usually goals are accomplished through a fair amount of suffering. And I wish I could tell you it was different, but it's not. And in my experience, and I think in the experience of a lot of people, they will tell you that usually your goal attainment has a fair amount of suffering that goes along with it in order for it to be ultimately meaningful. If you could just set a goal and achieve it without any effort or any whatever, that's not, that doesn't develop character, and it doesn't develop a lot of things in us, and usually it's a fairly frivolous goal. But when you set serious goals in front of you and you've made a plan, okay, that's the goal. Now, what is it going to take for me to attain it? What is the step-by-step strategic plan that I need to have? And again, normally that becomes self-evident. Obviously, if, say your goal is that over the next 10 years, say your family of origin is somewhat dysfunctional and it's destructed and there's a lot of broken relationships, and your goals, say for the next 5 years, your goal is, I want to do everything I can to help bring healing and wholeness into my family. Now that is a meaningful goal. Okay, that carries a lot of significance. Now you got to step back here and say, okay, if that's my goal, how do I do it? Well, I know my relationship with my parents, let's say, or my children is not very good. I'm gonna really try to rectify that. I'm gonna do everything I can to set those relationships right. If it means to, go and ask for forgiveness, I'm gonna do that. And that's what I love about that 12-step program. If you've got any doubts, go and look it up. Look up the 12-step program, because part of that is, admitting that you're an alcoholic. But then there's a lot more to it. Those 12 steps. One of them is, who have I hurt or who have I wronged that I still remember, that's still in my mind? Because you can't think of everybody, obviously, because most of us that would be a lifetime career, just going back and trying to set stuff right. So it's not everybody, but there will be certain events in your life that you wronged somebody. And by doing that, you've got to go back and set it right. You can't just let it go. You've tried it for 20 years and it doesn't work. You got to go back and set it right. I remember one summer I was in charge of our training facility in Lausanne, Switzerland. And there was a small staff there. Everybody was out. And this young guy comes along, and he just kind of showed up on our doorstep. He had been working on a kibbutz in Israel. And I don't know how he found us, but he just sort of ended up on our doorstep. And in those days, it was kind of a wide open, yeah, come on, join us, no big deal. But if you're here, we got some work projects we're working on. We'd appreciate it if you could help. And he said, yeah, no worries. And from day one, he'd supposed to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning to start working, and he didn't show up. I go, okay. Well, after a little while, this became a regular routine. So one day I went up to him and said, hey, listen, let's have a little chat here. Obviously, you're having some issues here. What's going on? That's why I asked, what's going on? And he said, to be honest, I'm running from the law. I said, oh, what's that about? And he said, well, 6 months ago, or maybe it was a year ago, he said, a buddy of mine, we did some crazy stuff. We held up a store and we used a gun. We used guns to do it. And so we were caught and we're charged, and this is, we're facing 7 to 10 years, I think it was, in prison. And when I was out on bail, I jumped bail. And I've been on the run now for about 9 months. And, if I give myself up, then when I go back, I'm going to have to go to prison. And I said, oh, okay, that's a pretty serious situation. What do you think you need to do? And so we talked about it. We shared a little bit. I wasn't very old at the time. I must have only been in my mid-20s, maybe 25, 26, something like that. And so what did I know? I knew it was a tough situation. And so eventually what happened, just so you know, he did go back. He turned himself in, went back to the States, was, I think, sentenced to 7 years in prison. He did 3 years in prison and then got out on good behavior. And while he was at our training facility in Switzerland, he met this girl who was about 2 years younger than he was, and her family just happened to be staying with us. And so when he got out of prison, he went back and ended up marrying this girl, and then he became a pastor and built a large church in California. And so not everything has a good ending like that, but there are things in your life you can run, but you can't hide. You know that one? You can run, but until you stop and face these issues that you're carrying, and oh, by the way, you're carrying them because your little conscience back there isn't letting you get away with it. You got to go and make it right. And then once you make it right, you're free. And so part of goal setting and setting your strategic plan will involve a number of steps. And a lot of them will be hard. They won't be easy. It'll involve doing the courageous thing, doing the right thing. And as you do that, then you'll come closer to your goal. You feel better about yourself. The better you feel, the more you do, and then the better person you become. And so we're going to continue this on in the next session and talking about strategic planning and how that morphs into character qualities and the character that you need to carry your goals forward. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for listening. Join us next time on Strategies for Living with Doug Sparks.